My name is Maeve, 32 years old, and I am standing outside the courthouse, holding the final verdict that changed everything. 18 months ago, my husband Daniel died in a car accident, and 3 days after his funeral, his family threw me out of the house we built together. They thought they had won, taking everything from the grieving widow, but they did not know about the secrets Daniel left behind, or that their greed would cost them everything they owned. Before I share this incredible story of justice, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Please hit that like button and subscribe to hear how one widow's patience and preparation led to the most satisfying legal revenge you will ever hear. 7 years ago, I met Daniel at an art exhibition in downtown Chicago. I was 25, working as a software developer for a tech startup, standing alone in front of an abstract painting, trying to understand what everyone else seemed to see in it. This handsome man in a perfectly tailored suit approached me and said the painting looked like his morning coffee after his 3-year-old nephew got hold of it. We both laughed. And that was the beginning of everything. Daniel was 35, an architect with his own small firm, passionate about sustainable design and creating homes that told stories. He was also the only son in a wealthy family raised in Lake Forest, with every privilege money could buy. His mother, Patricia, had inherited millions from her late husband's pharmaceutical empire, and she ruled her family like a queen, overseeing her court. I was the opposite of everything Patricia wanted for her precious son. An orphan since age 12, raised by my grandmother who passed when I was 18, I had worked 3 jobs to put myself through college. No trust fund, no family connections, no pedigree that mattered in Patricia's social circles. Just determination and coding skills that landed me a good job in tech. But Daniel did not care about any of that. He really saw me, not my lack of family or social standing. We dated for 2 years, and every moment felt like discovering a new chapter in the best book ever written. He proposed on a rooftop garden he had designed, surrounded by fairy lights, and the Chicago skyline, getting down on one knee with his grandmother's ring that Patricia had explicitly told him was meant for someone more suitable. The wedding was small, just 50 guests, because Patricia refused to invite her society friends to watch her son marry beneath his station. She sat in the front row, like someone at a funeral wearing black, her face pinched with disapproval. Sophia, Daniel's younger sister, spent the reception telling anyone who would listen that I had probably gotten pregnant to trap him. Marcus, the youngest sibling, got drunk and made a toast about gold diggers that Daniel shut down immediately. Despite his family's coldness, Daniel and I were happy. We bought a plot of land in Oak Park with my savings, $200,000 I had accumulated through careful investing and living frugally since college. It was every penny I had, but Daniel had a vision for our home that made my heart race. He would design it, I would manage the construction finances and permits, and together we would build something that was entirely ours. Patricia was furious when she learned we were building in Oak Park instead of Lake Forest near her. Even more furious when she discovered I was funding the land purchase. She pulled Daniel aside at every family dinner, reminding him that wives could not be trusted with financial decisions, that he needed to protect his assets, that I would leave him once I had secured my position. The house took 2 years to build. Daniel poured his soul into every detail, from the soaring windows that caught the morning light to the hidden reading nook he created just for me. I managed every contractor, every invoice, every permit, learning construction law and property regulations until I could recite them in my sleep. The final value was $850,000, a modern masterpiece that architectural magazines wanted to feature. There was just one detail that would later destroy everything. When it came time to file the deed, Patricia convinced Daniel to put only his name on it. She said it was for tax purposes, that it would protect me from liability if anything went wrong with his business, that it was just paperwork that meant nothing between two people who trusted each other. Daniel asked me if I minded, and looking into his earnest brown eyes, I said, "Of course not. We were married. What was his was mine, and what was mine was his. The piece of paper did not matter. I was wrong. It mattered more than I could have imagined. We lived in that house for 3 beautiful years. Every morning, Daniel would kiss me goodbye in the kitchen he had designed specifically for my love of cooking. Every evening, we would sit on the back deck he had oriented perfectly to watch the sunset. We talked about children, about growing old together, about adding a second story when our family grew. His family visited rarely, which suited us both perfectly. Patricia would come for obligatory holiday dinners, spending the entire time pointing out imagined flaws in my housekeeping or cooking. Sophia would bring her 2 children from her failed marriage, letting them run wild while she scrolled through her phone, occasionally making snide comments about how some people got lucky while others had to work for everything. Marcus would show up late, sometimes high, always asking Daniel for money for his latest business venture that never materialized. Daniel protected me from the worst of it, always standing between me and his family's venom. He would hold my hand under the table when Patricia made cutting remarks about my background. He would change the subject when Sophia started her passive-aggressive attacks. He would firmly refuse Marcus's requests for loans, knowing the money would disappear into his gambling debts. Then came the night that shattered everything. October 15th, a Thursday. Daniel was driving home from a client meeting in Naperville. It was raining, the kind of cold autumn rain that makes the roads slick as ice. A drunk driver ran a red light doing 70 miles per hour, hitting Daniel's car directly on the driver's side. I got the call at 9:43. The voice on the other end was professionally calm, asking if I was Maeve Richardson, asking if I could come to Northwestern Memorial Hospital immediately. I drove those 20 miles in a haze, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel, praying to any god that would listen to let him be okay. He was not okay. The doctors had done everything they could, but the internal injuries were too severe. I had 3 hours with him, 3 hours to say goodbye to the love of my life. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his hand in mine, machines beeping around us like a countdown to the end of the world. In his last moments of clarity, Daniel gripped my hand with surprising strength. He tried to speak, his voice so faint I had to lean close to hear. He said something about the basement, about keeping safe, about his mother. Then his eyes focused on mine one last time. He whispered that he loved me and he was gone. I do not remember much about the next few hours. There were papers to sign, calls to make, arrangements to begin. I called Patricia from the hospital waiting room, my voice hollow as I told her that her son was dead. She screamed, actually screamed, then hung up on me. Sophia sent a text asking about the will. Marcus did not respond at all. I drove home to our empty house at 3 in the morning. The porch light Daniel had installed last week was still on, waiting for him to come home. His coffee mug sat in the sink, unwashed, the last thing he had touched that morning. His architectural drawings were spread across his desk, projects he would never complete, dreams he would never build. I collapsed on our bed, still smelling like his cologne, and cried until I had no tears left. Then I just lay there, staring at the ceiling he had painted, the exact shade of blue that reminded him of my eyes, wondering how I was supposed to exist in a world without Daniel in it. The funeral was scheduled for 3 days after Daniel died, and Patricia took control immediately. She arrived at my house the morning after his death with a funeral director. She had already hired plans. She had already made decisions. She had already finalized. I was too numb with grief to fight her, sitting at my kitchen table while she made arrangements for her son's body as if I was not even there. She planned an elaborate service at the Presbyterian Church in Lake Forest. where Daniel had been baptized but had not attended since high school. The guest list read like a who's who of Chicago society, filled with people Daniel had actively avoided, business associates of Patricia's who barely knew him. My name appeared nowhere on the program except as surviving spouse in small print at the bottom. The obituary Patricia wrote mentioned Daniel's architectural achievements, his education at Northwestern, his membership in clubs he had quit years ago. It talked about his surviving mother Patricia, his beloved sister Sophia, his dear brother Marcus. I was mentioned in passing as his wife Maeve, no maiden name, no description, as if I was an afterthought in his life story. On the day of the funeral, I wore the black dress Daniel had bought me for our anniversary last year, the one he said made me look like a film noir heroine. Patricia took one look at me and suggested I might be more comfortable in the back row, since the front was reserved for immediate family. I stood my ground, sitting in the front pew where a wife belonged, even as she positioned herself between me and Daniel's casket. The service was everything Daniel would have hated: ostentatious flower arrangements that looked like they belonged at a mob funeral, a pastor who clearly did not know him reading generic platitudes about God's plan, classical music he never listened to instead of the jazz he loved. Patricia had erased everything that made Daniel who he was, replacing it with her vision of who she wished he had been. When it came time for eulogies, Patricia spoke for 20 minutes about her perfect son, the child who had brought her such joy, the successful man who had made her so proud. She mentioned his childhood achievements, his academic honours, his professional success. Not once did she mention our marriage, our home, our love. It was as if the last 7 years of his life had not existed. Sophia spoke next, crying dramatically as she talked about her wonderful brother, who had always been there for her, conveniently forgetting all the times she had called him only when she needed money or babysitting. She mentioned how he had promised to help with her children's education, a promise I had never heard him make, setting up what I did not yet realise was the beginning of their claim to his assets. Marcus stumbled through a brief speech, clearly hungover, or possibly still drunk from the night before. He talked about Daniel's generosity, how his brother had always helped family in need, another fabrication since Daniel had cut him off financially 2 years ago after the 5th loan that was never repaid. I was not invited to speak. When I stood up to walk to the podium, Patricia loudly announced it was time for the final viewing. The funeral director, clearly in her pocket, ushered everyone toward the casket, leaving me standing alone in the aisle with my unspoken words trapped in my throat. After the service at the reception Patricia hosted at her Lake Forest mansion, I overheard the conversations that made my blood run cold. Sophia was discussing with Patricia's lawyer about Daniel's assets, particularly the house. Marcus was asking about Daniel's bank accounts, his investment portfolio, his life insurance. They were dividing up his life like vultures over carrion, and he had been dead for less than a week. I left early, driving home alone, to the house that still smelled like Daniel's morning coffee. The house felt different now, like it knew he was never coming back. I wandered through rooms we had designed together, touching surfaces he had touched, trying to hold on to any piece of him that remained. That night, I could not sleep in our bed. Instead, I found myself in his office, sitting in his chair, surrounded by his drawings and plans. I opened his laptop, knowing his password because we had no secrets from each other, and started looking through his files, desperate for any connection to him, any piece of his thoughts I could hold on to. That is when I found a folder labelled "For Maeve, just in case." My heart stopped. Inside were documents dated just a month ago. Insurance policies, bank statements, investment accounts, and a letter addressed to me. My hands shook as I opened it. "My darling Maeve," it began. "If you are reading this, something has happened to me. I need you to know that I have been worried about my family's intentions toward you. My mother has been pressuring me about the house, about our assets, about protecting the family wealth from outsiders. She does not understand that you are not an outsider. You are my heart, my home, my everything. The letter went on to detail his concerns about his mother's increasing interference, her suggestions that he should update his will to protect family assets, her hints that marriages do not always last, and he needed to think about his legacy. He had resisted, but he was worried about what might happen if something happened to him before he could legally protect me. He instructed me to look in the basement safe behind the wine rack we never used because neither of us really drank wine. The combination was our wedding date. He said he had left something there that would help me if his family tried to take what was ours. I ran to the basement, my heart pounding. Behind the dusty wine rack was a safe I had never noticed built into the wall and painted to match. I entered our wedding date with trembling fingers. Inside was a manila envelope thick with documents and a USB drive labelled insurance. The documents were devastating and beautiful at once. A new will dated 2 weeks ago, leaving everything to me, signed and witnessed but not yet filed with his attorney. Account statements for a private investment account I never knew existed worth $2 million, with me listed as the sole beneficiary. A life insurance policy for $3 million purchased 5 years ago that Patricia knew nothing about, but it was the USB drive that held the most explosive contents. Audio recordings of conversations between Daniel and his mother dating back 6 months. Patricia pressuring him to divorce me to claim I had been unfaithful to protect the family money from the gold digger. Daniel defending me, getting angry, threatening to cut her off completely if she did not stop. The most recent recording was from just 2 weeks ago. Patricia's voice cold and calculating, saying that if something were to happen to him, she would make sure I got nothing, that she had connections, lawyers, judges, who would ensure the family assets stayed in the family. Daniel's response was equally cold, telling her that if she ever tried to hurt me, he would release information that would destroy her social standing. He did not specify what information, and I wondered what secrets Daniel knew about his mother that gave him such leverage. But it did not matter now. He was gone, and I was about to face Patricia's wrath alone. The next morning I started preparing. I made copies of everything, storing them in multiple locations. I opened a safety deposit box at a bank Patricia did not use, securing the originals. I uploaded the audio files to 3 different cloud services. I was not naturally suspicious, but Daniel's warnings had made me paranoid, and that paranoia was about to save me. On the 3rd day after the funeral, I was drinking coffee in my kitchen when I heard cars pulling into our driveway. Through the window, I saw Patricia's Mercedes, followed by Sophia's Range Rover, and a police car. My stomach dropped, but I was not entirely surprised. Daniel had warned me this might happen. Patricia walked in without knocking, using the spare key Daniel had given her years ago for emergencies. Behind her came Sophia Marcus, 2 police officers, and a man in an expensive suit who could only be her lawyer. They filled my kitchen like an invading army, and I stood there in my pajamas, coffee mug in hand, looking like exactly what they thought I was, a helpless widow about to be destroyed. Patricia's voice was triumphant as she spoke. Maeve, I understand this is difficult, but we need to discuss Daniel's estate immediately. As his mother and primary beneficiary, I need to take possession of his assets, including this house. I set down my coffee cup carefully, my hand surprisingly steady. I was not aware you were his primary beneficiary, Patricia. We were married. I would assume that makes me his next of kin. Her lawyer stepped forward, pulling out a document. Mrs. Richardson, I have here a copy of Daniel's will filed with the probate court 5 years ago. It clearly states that in the event of his death, all assets revert to his mother, Patricia Richardson. I looked at the will, recognizing Daniel's signature, but knowing immediately it was from before we were married. This will predates our marriage by 3 years. Surely there is a more recent version. Patricia's smile was cold. That is the only will on file with his attorney. I confirmed this yesterday. Now, as the legal owner of this house, I am going to have to ask you to vacate the premises. You have 2 hours to pack your personal belongings." The word vacate hung in the air like a death sentence. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by hostile faces, trying to process that Patricia was actually evicting me from my own home 3 days after my husband's funeral. The police officers looked uncomfortable but said nothing clearly there, only to enforce what appeared to be a legal eviction. Patricia's lawyer continued reading from his documents, his voice monotonous and official. "The deed to this property is solely in Daniel Richardson's name. According to his will, all real property transfers to Patricia Richardson. Mrs. Maeve Richardson has no legal claim to this residence. We are prepared to offer 2 hours for personal belongings to be removed, after which the locks will be changed." Sophia could not contain her satisfaction, stepping forward with a predatory smile. "I will help you pack, Maeve. We would not want you to accidentally take anything that belongs to the estate. Family heirlooms, for instance, or jewellery that Daniel bought with family money." I found my voice, though it came out smaller than intended. "Most of the furniture in this house was purchased with my salary. I have receipts. The kitchen appliances, the bedroom set, the living room furniture, I paid for all of it." Marcus laughed, an ugly sound that echoed off the walls Daniel had designed. "Good luck proving that in court. Do you have any idea how much lawyers cost? Oh, wait. You will not be able to afford one anyway, once we freeze the joint accounts." Patricia nodded to her lawyer, who produced another document. "I have here a court order freezing all accounts pending probate. As executor of Daniel's estate, Mrs. Patricia Richardson has requested this measure to preserve assets during the settlement process." My mind raced, but I kept my face carefully neutral. They did not know about the private account, the life insurance, the documents in the safe deposit box. I needed them to believe they had won completely, or they might start looking deeper. "This is our home," I said quietly, letting tears fall. They were real tears, but not for the reason Patricia assumed. They were tears of rage at the cruelty of these people who claimed to love Daniel. "Daniel and I built this house together. Every wall, every window, every detail was our choice." Patricia's voice was ice. "You mean Daniel built this house? With his talent, his vision, his family's connections to get permits and contractors. You were just living in it, dear. There is a difference between being a resident and being an owner. A lesson you should have learned before you targeted my son." The accusation was so bold, so cruel, that even one of the police officers shifted uncomfortably. But I said nothing, letting her reveal her true nature to witnesses who might remember this moment later. Sophia started up the stairs toward our bedroom. "I will begin checking the master bedroom for family items. Mother's pearl necklace that Daniel gave you, for instance. That needs to return to the family. That necklace had been Daniel's grandmother's, and he had given it to me on our wedding day, despite Patricia's objections. It was mine legally and morally, but I knew fighting now would be pointless. Let them take things. Things could be replaced or recovered. What I needed was time and strategy. Marcus was already in Daniel's office, rifling through drawers. "His watch collection is here. The Rolex, the Omega. These are worth at least 50,000. I call dibs on the Rolex. Daniel always said he would want me to have it." Daniel had said no such thing. In fact, he had specifically told me he wanted his watches donated to charity if anything happened to him, except for his grandfather's vintage Timex that held only sentimental value. But Marcus was already pocketing the expensive pieces while Patricia watched approvingly. 2 hours. They were giving me 2 hours to pack up 7 years of life. I went upstairs to find Sophia going through my jewellery box, pulling out pieces and sorting them into 2 piles. What she deemed mine versus what she claimed was Daniel's. "This tennis bracelet, definitely Daniel's purchase," she said, adding it to her pile. She was wrong. I had bought it myself with my first bonus. But again, I stayed silent. I pulled out suitcases and began packing clothes, only clothes, the most basic necessities. I wanted them to think I was beaten, destroyed, with nothing left but the clothes on my back. Sophia watched me like a hawk, occasionally pulling items from my suitcase. This cashmere sweater looks expensive. Daniel must have bought it. Into her pile it went. My laptop was in my office, and I made sure to pack it along with my personal documents that I had kept in a filing cabinet. Marcus appeared in the doorway, checking to make sure I was not taking anything valuable. He did not know that the real valuables were already safe in my deposit box. As I packed, Patricia stood in the doorway, delivering her victory speech. "You know I tried to warn Daniel about you. Girl with no family, no background, no breeding, but he was always too soft-hearted, too willing to believe the best in people. You took advantage of his kindness, his generosity. You isolated him from his family. The lies were so outrageous I almost laughed. Daniel had distanced himself from his family long before he met me, tired of their greed and manipulation. I had actually encouraged him to maintain relationships with them, believing family was important. How wrong I had been. He would still be alive if it were not for you," Patricia continued, and that stopped me cold. "If he had not been driving back from some client meeting, you probably pushed him to take chasing money to fund your expensive tastes. He would still be here." The cruelty of blaming me for Daniel's death, killed by a drunk driver through no fault of his own or mine, was breathtaking, but it also revealed how Patricia's mind worked, how she would twist any narrative to make herself the victim and me the villain. By the time my 2 hours were up, I had 3 suitcases and 2 boxes of personal items, 7 years reduced to what I could carry. The police officers helped me load them into an Uber, as Patricia had already had my car towed, claiming it was registered to Daniel and therefore part of the estate. As I stood on the sidewalk, neighbours watching from windows, Patricia delivered her final blow. "The credit cards have been cancelled, the bank accounts are frozen. I would suggest you find somewhere cheap to stay, and perhaps consider moving back to wherever you came from. There is nothing for you here anymore," Sophia added with false sweetness. "If you need money for a bus ticket home, I would be happy to lend you $100. Consider it charity." I looked at the 3 of them standing in the doorway of my home like conquerors and memorized their faces in this moment of perceived triumph. They thought they had destroyed me, taken everything, left me with nothing. They had no idea what was coming. "Thank you for the 2 hours, I said quietly, getting into the Uber. "I will remember your kindness." Patricia laughed. "Kindness? I could have had you arrested for trespassing. 2 hours was more than you deserved." As the Uber pulled away, I saw Marcus already changing the locks while Sophia carried my jewellery box to her car. Through the window, I could see Patricia on her phone, probably calling her society friends to share the news of her victory over the gold digger who had tried to steal her son's fortune. The Uber driver, an elderly man with kind eyes, looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Rough day, miss. My husband died 4 days ago," I said simply. "His family just threw me out of our house." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I have been driving for 30 years, seen a lot of family drama after deaths. The ones who act the worst usually get what is coming to them eventually." I managed a small smile. "I am counting on it." I had him take me to a modest motel on the outskirts of Oak Park, the kind of place that rented by the week and did not ask questions. It was a far cry from the beautiful home Daniel and I had built, but it would serve my purposes. I needed to appear defeated, destroyed, invisible, while I prepared for war. That night, sitting on a lumpy motel bed that smelled of industrial disinfectant, I opened my laptop and began my real work. First, I backed up all the audio files again, creating multiple redundancies. Then I transcribed every recording, noting dates, times, and circumstances. Patricia's voice threatening me, discussing ways to break up my marriage planning, to steal my home. It was all there in digital clarity. I accessed the security footage from our home surveillance system, which backed up to a cloud service Patricia did not know existed. The cameras had captured everything from this morning: the illegal eviction, the theft of my belongings, the cruelty and gloating. Illinois was a two-party consent state for audio recording, but video in my own home was perfectly legal. Next, I logged into the private bank account Daniel had hidden. $2 million accumulated over years from projects he had kept off his company's books to avoid his mother's prying eyes. The account was in a Delaware bank opened 5 years ago, with me as the sole beneficiary upon his death. The paperwork was ironclad, prepared by a lawyer Patricia had never met. The life insurance company would take a few weeks to process the claim, but $3 million would eventually be mine. Patricia had no idea this policy existed because Daniel had paid the premiums from his hidden account. He had thought of everything protecting me, even in death. But I needed more than money. I needed justice. I needed to destroy them the way they had tried to destroy me, and for that, I needed the right lawyer. I spent the rest of the night researching attorneys who specialized in estate law and had experience fighting wealthy families. One name kept appearing: James Morrison, a former prosecutor who had transitioned to private practice after exposing corruption among Chicago's elite. He had a reputation for taking cases others would not touch and winning them through meticulous preparation and aggressive tactics. The reviews of his services told a story. He had fought the Pemberton family and won, recovering a $10 million estate for a disinherited daughter. He had exposed the Whitmore family's fraud, sending 2 members to prison. Most interestingly, he had faced Patricia Richardson in court 10 years ago in a case involving her late husband's business partner and had lost on a technicality. A lawyer with a grudge against Patricia could be exactly what I needed. I sent him an email at 2 a.m, briefly outlining my situation and mentioning I had extensive documentation, including audio recordings. I marked it urgent and waited. By 6 a.m, I had a response. Mrs. Richardson, I am very interested in your case. Can you meet today at 10 a.m? Bring everything. James Morrison. His office was in the Loop, a gleaming tower that spoke of success and power. I arrived in my best remaining outfit, carrying a box of evidence that would destroy Patricia's carefully constructed lies. The receptionist, seeing my red-rimmed eyes and simple clothes, almost turned me away until I mentioned my appointment. James Morrison was not what I expected. 60 years old, silver-haired, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, he looked more like a professor than a legal pit bull. But when he smiled, I saw the shark beneath the surface. "Patricia Richardson," he said, saying her name like it tasted bad. "She cost me a case 10 years ago by bribing a court clerk to lose crucial evidence. I could never prove it, but I knew. I have been waiting for another shot at her." I placed the USB drive on his desk. "Then you are going to love this." For the next 3 hours, we listened to recordings, reviewed documents, and built our strategy. James's expression grew more predatory with each piece of evidence. When we reached the recording of Patricia discussing how she would forge documents if necessary to steal my assets, he actually laughed. "She got sloppy," he said. "Grief makes people careless, and Patricia thought she had already won. This recording alone could put her in prison for conspiracy to commit fraud." "I do not just want to win," I said quietly. "I want to destroy them. They took my home, my belongings, my dignity. They blamed me for Daniel's death. They threw me out like garbage 3 days after his funeral. I want them to lose everything." James leaned back in his chair, studying me. "That kind of vengeance can consume you. Are you prepared for how ugly this will get?" I thought about Daniel, about the life we had built, about the cruelty of his family. They started this war. I am just going to finish it. The first thing James did was file an emergency injunction to prevent Patricia from selling or transferring any assets from Daniel's estate. Within 48 hours, she received notice that all property transactions were frozen pending investigation into potential fraud. I heard later from a mutual acquaintance that she had screamed so loudly at her lawyer that security was called to the office. Next, we filed a formal challenge to the will Patricia had presented, citing the existence of a more recent will and evidence of fraudulent intent. We also filed separate criminal complaints for theft, as the jewellery and watches taken from the house were my personal property, and illegal eviction, as I was a legal resident regardless of ownership disputes. But the real bombshell came when James filed a civil suit for intentional infliction of emotional distress fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud, seeking $10 million in damages. We named Patricia, Sophia and Marcus individually, as well as Patricia's lawyer for his role in the illegal eviction. The news hit the Chicago Society pages within a week. Richardson family fortune in jeopardy as widow fights back, read the Tribune headline. Patricia's carefully maintained reputation began to crack as details of the case leaked to the press, carefully orchestrated by James through his media contacts. While the legal machinery ground forward, I hired a private investigator named Kate Chen, recommended by James as the best in the business. Her job was to dig into Patricia's finances and find any additional leverage we might need. What she discovered exceeded my wildest expectations. Patricia had been embezzling from her late husband's estate for years, siphoning money into offshore accounts. She had claimed his pharmaceutical company had declined in value, paying minimal taxes on the inheritance while secretly selling off patents to shell companies she controlled. The IRS would be very interested in this information. Sophia, it turned out, had never legally divorced her first husband because he had disappeared to avoid debts. She had been collecting his Social Security benefits by forging his signature, a federal crime. She had also been selling prescription drugs obtained with fraudulent prescriptions using her mother's connections to corrupt doctors. Marcus was the easiest target. His gambling debts were not just to casinos, but to organised crime figures who had been looking for him. He owed over $500,000 to people who broke kneecaps for missing payments. He had been hiding at Patricia's house using money stolen from Daniel's estate to make minimum payments. Armed with this information, James scheduled depositions for all three of them. The first was Patricia, who arrived with an army of lawyers wearing her most expensive suit and her late husband's family diamonds, trying to project power and confidence. James destroyed her in 3 hours. He played the recordings of her threats against me, watched her face go white as her own voice filled the room, discussing forging documents. He presented evidence of the embezzlement, the tax fraud, the systematic theft from her late husband's business partners. By the end, her lawyers were requesting breaks every 15 minutes to confer with their increasingly hysterical client. But the moment that broke her came when James produced a document Daniel had hidden in our safe deposit box. It was a letter from Patricia's late husband, written shortly before his death, expressing concerns about her mental stability and requesting Daniel take control of the family finances. He had suspected she was stealing but died before he could prove it. Sophia's deposition was scheduled for the next day, but she never showed up. Her lawyer called to say she had been arrested that morning on federal charges for Social Security fraud and prescription drug distribution. The FBI had received an anonymous tip with extensive documentation. I smiled when I heard the news, knowing exactly who had sent that tip. Marcus lasted 2 days before disappearing entirely. The stress of the legal proceedings had caused him to miss payments to his creditors, and they had come collecting. He abandoned his apartment, his car, and all his possessions, fleeing to Mexico with whatever cash he could scrape together. His absence was treated as an admission of guilt in our civil case. 6 weeks after filing our initial complaints, we received word that the criminal charges for theft and illegal eviction had been accepted by the district attorney. Patricia was arrested at her country club during a charity luncheon, handcuffed in front of all her society friends. The photo made the front page of every Chicago newspaper. The civil trial was scheduled for 3 months later, but Patricia's lawyers requested a settlement conference. They knew they were going to lose and lose badly. The recordings alone would destroy any defense they might mount, and the evidence of additional crimes meant Patricia faced potential prison time beyond our civil case. James and I met with Patricia and her lead attorney in a conference room that overlooked the Chicago River. She looked like she had aged 10 years in 3 months, her perfect facade crumbling under the weight of her crimes being exposed. Her lawyer spoke first, his voice defeated. "My client is prepared to return the house immediately, along with all personal property taken from it. She will also pay damages in the amount of $2 million to settle all civil claims." James laughed. $2 million? Your client stole a house worth $850,000 personal property, worth at least $200,000, and subjected my client to intentional infliction of emotional distress immediately following her husband's death. We are seeking $10 million, and given the evidence, we will get it. Patricia finally spoke, her voice a shadow of its former authority. "I do not have $10 million liquid. Most of my assets are tied up in real estate and investments." "Then sell them," I said, speaking for the first time. "Sell everything, the way you tried to make me sell everything I had just to survive." She looked at me with something like shock, as if she could not believe the woman she had thrown out with nothing had engineered her complete destruction. "You planned this. You and Daniel planned all of this." "Daniel planned for you to try to destroy me," I corrected. "He knew what you were capable of. He protected me even in death, which is more than you ever did for him in life. You spent so much time trying to control him that you never actually knew him." The negotiations continued for 6 hours. In the end, Patricia agreed to return the house, all personal property, and pay $5 million in damages. She would also drop any claim to Daniel's estate, allowing his true will to be processed without challenge. Additionally, she would pay all legal fees and court costs. But I was not done. As part of the settlement, I demanded Patricia write a letter of apology that would be published in the Chicago Tribune, admitting to her actions and clearing my name of any gold digger accusations she had spread. She would also be required to attend grief counseling and family therapy, with reports submitted to the court quarterly for 2 years. The final term was the cruelest and the most satisfying. Patricia would be required to sell her Lake Forest mansion, the symbol of her status and power, to pay the settlement. The buyer would be determined by the court to ensure fair market value, and she would have 90 days to vacate. 3 days later, I returned to my house with a police escort. Patricia was there with movers removing the belongings she had brought in during her brief occupation. She could not look at me, keeping her eyes down as she supervised the packing of her things. Sophia was nowhere to be seen dealing with her own legal problems that would likely result in federal prison time. Marcus was still missing, though rumors placed him working as a dishwasher in Tijuana, hiding from both American law and his creditors. As Patricia prepared to leave, she stopped at the door and turned to me. "I hope you are satisfied. You have destroyed our family." I met her gaze steadily. "Your family was destroyed long before I came along. You destroyed it with greed, with cruelty, with the belief that money and status mattered more than love. Daniel knew who you really were. That is why he protected me from you." She left without another word, and I stood in my home, our home, for the first time in months. Everything had been returned, though some items were damaged from rough handling. The jewelry Sophia had taken was recovered from her apartment after her arrest. The watches Marcus had stolen were found in a pawn shop and returned. But more than the physical items, I had recovered something else: my dignity, my sense of justice, and the knowledge that Daniel's love continued to protect me even after death. The criminal trial took another year. Patricia was convicted of fraud and conspiracy, receiving 2 years probation and 300 hours of community service. Her reputation was destroyed. her fortune decimated by legal fees and settlements, her family scattered and broken. Sophia was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for social security fraud and prescription drug distribution. Her children were placed with their father's family, who had been searching for them since Sophia had disappeared with them 5 years earlier. Marcus never returned to the United States. The last anyone heard, he had moved further south into Central America, always running from debts that would follow him forever. 6 months after reclaiming my home, I stood in the kitchen Daniel had designed for me, preparing dinner for friends who had supported me through the nightmare. The house felt alive again, filled with laughter and warmth instead of grief and bitterness. I had redecorated some rooms, not to erase Daniel, but to blend our past with my future, creating something that honoured him while allowing me to move forward. The settlement money and life insurance had made me financially secure for life, but I continued working as a software developer, finding purpose in creating rather than just existing. I established the Daniel Richardson Foundation for Sustainable Architecture, providing scholarships for students from disadvantaged backgrounds who showed promise in design and construction. One morning, I received a call from the federal prison where Sophia was serving her sentence. She wanted to see me. Against James's advice, I agreed to visit. She looked smaller in her prison uniform, her perfectly maintained appearance replaced by a rawness I had never seen before. "I need to apologize," she said without preamble. "Not because my lawyer told me to, not because I want something, but because I finally understand what we did to you was unforgivable." I listened without speaking, letting her continue. "Daniel loved you," she said, tears falling freely. "He talked about you constantly before he died, about your intelligence, your kindness, your strength. We were so blinded by mother's poison that we could not see what he saw. We destroyed the one person he loved most, thinking we were protecting his memory. You were not protecting anything," I said quietly. "You were just taking the way you always took from Daniel when he was alive." She nodded, accepting the harsh truth. "My children are with their father's family now. They are better off. I get letters, sometimes photos. They look happy in a way they never did with me. I was becoming my mother, and prison might be the only thing that stopped me from destroying them the way she destroyed us." I left that prison visit feeling lighter somehow. Sophia's apology did not erase the pain, but it provided a kind of closure I had not expected. Patricia reached out, only once a letter arriving on the 2nd anniversary of Daniel's death. Her handwriting was shaky, the words carefully chosen. "Maeve, I do not expect forgiveness, nor do I deserve it. I spent my entire life believing that controlling everything and everyone around me would keep me safe, would prevent loss. In the end, my need for control cost me everything: my son's love, my family, my home, my reputation. You asked me once if I ever really knew Daniel. I did not. I knew only the son I wanted him to be, not the man he actually was. He chose you because you saw him, really saw him, in a way I never could. The house you shared was built with love, something I had forgotten existed. I am living in a small apartment now, working as a bookkeeper for a charity that helps disadvantaged families. It is humbling work that pays little, but for the first time in my life, I feel like I am contributing something positive to the world. I think Daniel would approve. I hope you find happiness again. You deserve it. Patricia. I read the letter 3 times before filing it away. I would never forgive her completely, but I could acknowledge her attempt at growth, even if it came too late. On the 3rd anniversary of Daniel's death, I held a memorial service at our home. Not the elaborate production Patricia had orchestrated, but a simple gathering of Daniel's true friends, colleagues, who had admired his work clients, whose lives he had improved through his designs. We shared stories, real stories, about the man he actually was rather than the fiction his family had created. James Morrison attended, having become a friend through our legal battle. He pulled me aside during the reception to share some news. Marcus was found dead in Guatemala. bar fight, apparently. He died alone, unknown, unmourned. I thought you should know. I felt nothing at the news, neither satisfaction nor sadness. Marcus had chosen his path long before he met me, and it had led inevitably to a violent end. His death was simply the final consequence of a life lived taking from others. A year later, I met someone. His name was Tom, a contractor who specialized in sustainable building hired to repair some damage to the house from a storm. He was nothing like Daniel, quiet where Daniel had been outgoing, careful where Daniel had been spontaneous. But he was kind, genuine, and when he looked at me, he saw me, not Daniel's widow or Patricia's victim, just me. We took things slowly, both of us carrying our own grief. Him from a divorce that had ended badly, me from a love that had ended too soon. But gradually, we built something new together, not a replacement for what I had lost, but something entirely its own. 5 years after Daniel's death, Tom and I married in a small ceremony in the backyard of the house Daniel and I had built. It felt right somehow, bringing new love into a space created by old love, showing that life continues even after devastating loss. Patricia died 2 years later, alone in her apartment, found by a neighbour when she failed to show up for her volunteer shift at the charity. Her obituary was brief, mentioning only her children and her charitable work in her final years. I attended the funeral, one of only a dozen people who came. Sophia attended under guard from prison. Marcus was long dead, and the society friends who had once flocked to Patricia's parties were nowhere to be seen. As I stood at her grave, I thought about the complete reversal of fortune that had occurred. She had tried to take everything from me and ended with nothing. I had lost everything and gained it all back, plus something more. The knowledge that love, real love, protects us even in death, and that justice, though sometimes slow, eventually finds its way. The house still stands in Oak Park, now filled with the laughter of my children, with Tom. Daniel's office has become a nursery, his drawings framed on the walls like artwork. Sometimes I tell them stories about the man who designed their home, who loved their mother so much he protected her even after he was gone. I never tell them about Patricia, Sophia, or Marcus. Some stories do not need to be passed down. Some pain does not need to be inherited. They will know only that their home was built with love, protected by love, and reclaimed through love's triumph over greed. Have you ever faced betrayal from family after a loss? How did you find the strength to fight back when everything seemed stacked against you? What would you have done if Daniel's family had thrown you out? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and redemption resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of triumph over adversity. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that sometimes the underdog wins, that preparation and patience can overcome privilege and power. Thank you for listening to my story. May you never need the kind of strength I had to find, but if you do, may you remember that sometimes losing everything is just the beginning of gaining what you truly deserve. Love protects us in ways we cannot imagine, and justice, though it may take time, has a way of finding those who wait for it with evidence in hand.